The wind tore through the plains that night, tearing at the canvas like claws of some unseen beast, and under that trembling tent, a mother's whisper was the only thing keeping the dark from swallowing her children whole. The storm had rolled over the Wyoming plains without warning. Just a low hum that became a roar, a curtain of dust and rain that turned the world to mud and fear. Inside a sagging tent patched with flour sacks and old dresses, Martha Hale held her youngest close, his tiny chest pressed against hers. The baby's cry had grown weaker over the past days, not from peace but hunger. The last of the bread was gone 2 nights ago, and she'd been stretching a pot of thin bean broth so long it was more hope than food. Her eldest, Ben, sat upright beside the fire pit, stirring what little warmth the coals offered. At 10, he carried himself like a man, though his shoulders still trembled with cold. Lucy, 8 and bright-eyed despite the frost creeping under the tent flaps, wrapped her threadbare shawl around the baby. They were 3 small souls orbiting their mother's courage, and she, though bone-tired, refused to let them see the fear that gnawed at her. "Tell us the story again, Mama," Lucy whispered. Her voice trembled not from excitement but from the cold air that made her breath visible. Martha smiled faintly, a ghost of a memory stirring in her chest. She began softly, her voice cracking. "Once there was a river wider than the sky, and on its banks stood a house that smelled like fresh bread and cedar wood." The words were the same she'd told every night since her husband died in the mining explosion at Blackstone Ridge. It was the story of their old life, before everything burned and collapsed. Their cabin, their savings, their certainty that tomorrow would be kinder. She spoke of her husband, Thomas Hale, with the kind of reverence that made even the wind pause to listen. The children clung to every word, their eyelids heavy but their hearts steadied by the rhythm of her voice. When the story ended, Martha pressed a hand to her lips and looked toward the flap of the tent. The storm still raged outside, and every few moments thunder rolled so close it rattled the tin cup beside the fire. She wondered if the people of Silver Bluff, only a mile away, could hear it too. If they sat safe under roofs and warm blankets while she prayed her tent wouldn't blow away before morning. She'd gone to that town once weeks ago to beg for work or scraps. They'd looked at her, mud on her dress, baby in her arms, the other 2 barefoot, and seen not a mother but a burden. "Try the mission in Cheyenne," they'd said. But Cheyenne was 3 days away on foot. She never went back. Now they called her the tent lady, and when she came near the well, women whispered and men turned away. The night dragged slow, as if time itself feared to cross that storm. Martha added a few sticks to the fire, the last from the pile Ben had gathered before dusk. The flames flickered uncertainly, shadows shifting across her tired face. She glanced down at her hands, raw and cracked from washing and sewing what little cloth they owned. Her nails were broken, and her wedding ring, once polished by her husband's thumb, hung loose from the cold. Outside, the wind howled like a wounded thing. She closed her eyes for a moment, picturing what warmth used to feel like. A hearth, laughter, the smell of wood smoke and supper. The memory hurt more than the hunger. But then Eli stirred against her chest and she pushed the pain aside. Her purpose wasn't comfort anymore. It was survival. When the baby whimpered again, Martha tightened her shawl around him, whispering into his hair. "Hush now, my sweet. Mama's here. Mama's always here." Her words trembled, not from the cold, but from the weight of a promise she wasn't sure she could keep. Ben glanced up from the fire. "Ma," he said quietly. "It's starting to leak again." Martha followed his gaze. A trickle of water slid down the tent pole, pooling near their blanket. She grabbed an old tin cup and placed it beneath, catching the rhythm of the drops. "We'll patch it in the morning," she murmured, though she knew the canvas couldn't take another beating like this. Lucy's eyelids drooped as she asked, "Will we have breakfast tomorrow, Mama?" Martha hesitated, her heart twisting. "If the Lord's kind, we will," she whispered. "And if he's not, we'll still get through the day." Her words settled heavy in the air, but she forced a smile for her children's sake. She had learned that strength wasn't loud. It was the quiet refusal to give up when no one else was watching. For a while there was only the sound of rain and the faint crackle of fire. Martha sat still, staring at the tent flap as though expecting something or someone to appear. The wind shifted suddenly, carrying with it the distant sound of hooves. At first she thought it was her mind playing tricks again. She'd imagined help so many nights that the sound of salvation had become part of her dreaming. But this was real, steady, heavy, growing closer. Ben looked up, his eyes wide. "Ma, you hear that?" Martha pressed a finger to her lips, straining to listen. Through the curtain of rain she could hear the slow rhythm of a horse fighting against the mud. The firelight flickered as a shadow passed across the canvas wall. The children froze. The hoofbeat stopped just outside the tent. For a moment there was only silence, thick, tense, alive. Then came the sound of leather creaking, a low grunt, and the muffled jingle of spurs. Martha's pulse quickened. She reached for the small pistol hidden beneath the blanket, a relic from her husband's tool chest. Her hand shook as she aimed it toward the flap. "Who's there?" she called, her voice sharp but trembling. The wind carried back no answer, only the flap of the canvas. Then a deep voice, calm and deliberate, cut through the storm. "Ma'am, I mean no harm." Her children huddled closer. Martha's heart hammered in her chest. The stranger's silhouette loomed tall against the firelight leaking through the canvas. "Storm's bad," the voice continued, low and respectful. "Your fire's about to go out." Martha's grip tightened on the pistol. "We're fine," she lied. There was a pause, the kind that sits heavy with unspoken truth. Then the voice said quietly, "No one's fine in a night like this." The wind tore at the tent again, rain splattering against the ground. Martha hesitated, her breath shallow. The stranger stepped closer, just enough for her to see the brim of a drenched hat and the gleam of kind eyes behind it. "Please," he said, his tone steady and strangely gentle. "Let me help." Martha looked at her children, at their pale faces, their trembling hands, and then back toward the shadow outside. For the first time that night, she didn't know what to fear more, the storm outside or the man standing in it. The stranger's horse neighed softly, and as Martha lowered her pistol, the voice said the words that would change everything. "You'll be safe under a roof tonight." Lightning cracked so bright it split the night in two, and for one fleeting heartbeat Martha saw him, a lone figure on horseback, soaked through with rain, watching her tent from the ridge like an omen the storm had delivered. The flash faded, leaving only the roll of thunder and the hiss of wind through the grass. Martha's pulse pounded in her ears. She tightened her grip on the pistol, the fire's glow throwing nervous shadows across her face. The children stirred behind her, half asleep, unaware that the thin canvas wall separating them from danger had just become useless. Another flash came, and this time the stranger moved. He guided his horse carefully down the slope, the animal's hooves squelching in the mud. He rode tall, his coat heavy with rain, hat brim low against the storm. There was something measured in the way he approached, not hurried, not reckless, just steady. That calm in the middle of such chaos chilled her more than the cold. "Stay back!" Martha shouted, her voice breaking against the wind. The figure slowed but didn't stop. She could see him clearer now, the horse's flanks shining wet, the man's outline cut from years of sun and saddle. "I ain't looking for trouble," he called over the storm. His voice carried a gravelly calm, the kind born from long days and harder nights. "Just saw your fire near the creek. Thought someone might need a hand." Martha hesitated. No man came offering help without wanting something in return. She'd learned that lesson enough times to wear it like armor. "We don't need help," she called back. The stranger dismounted slowly, his boots sinking into the mud. He raised both hands, palms open. "Ma'am, I'll stay right here," he said. "Just figured maybe your fire could use a little more wood." He reached into his saddlebag, pulling out a few dry sticks wrapped in oilcloth. Martha's eyes narrowed. She could barely find twigs dry enough to burn, yet he'd come prepared. The wind howled again, threatening to snuff out their little flame, and she glanced toward her children, who huddled closer. "Please, Mama," whispered Lucy. "Let him help." Martha's jaw tightened. Pride had kept them alive this long. Pride and stubborn grit. But that same pride was now staring down a stranger who didn't look like he'd back away easy. "Set the wood down there," she said finally, nodding toward the wet ground a few feet from the tent. Her voice wavered between defiance and exhaustion. The man obeyed, kneeling to place the bundle down carefully. Up close, the firelight revealed more of him. Rough stubble on a strong jaw, eyes that looked like they'd seen too much and trusted too little. His coat was patched, his boots worn to the bone, and a faint scar traced down his cheek. "Name's Cole Maddox," he said quietly, straightening. "Was riding from Redwater when the storm caught me. Saw your fire, figured no one should weather this alone." Martha said nothing. Her mind raced. Redwater was a half-day's ride east, and travelers from that direction usually meant drifters, bounty hunters, or men running from something. "You can move along now, Mr. Maddox," she said firmly. "We've got all we need." Cole gave a faint, humorless smile. "Begging your pardon, ma'am, but from where I stand, it looks like you got nothing but courage and 3 cold children." The words hit harder than she expected. Before she could reply, the wind kicked again, scattering sparks from the fire. Cole moved fast, shielding it with his body until the worst of the gust passed. When he looked back, Martha was staring at him, her expression unreadable. Part fear, part gratitude. "I've got coffee," he said, rummaging in his bag. "And a dry blanket or two. You can take 'em. I'll be on my way once the horse settles." The offer dangled between them, tempting and dangerous. Martha's pride screamed to refuse, but her children's shivering hands and hollow eyes made her hesitate. She wanted to say yes, but the habit of distrust was stronger than hunger. "We don't take charity," she said finally. Cole looked at her for a long moment, rain dripping from the brim of his hat. "Didn't say it was charity," he murmured. "Just good sense. I've buried enough folks who thought pride could keep out the cold." That quiet line hit her like a knife. There was something in his tone, the weight of loss, not pity. She found herself studying him differently now. The way his hands trembled slightly when he unwrapped the oilcloth. The way his gaze lingered on the children with something like regret. Ben, bold in his curiosity, stepped forward. "Mister, your horse got a name?" Cole's face softened. "Yeah," he said, brushing the animal's mane. "Name's Whiskey. He's meaner than he looks, but he don't bite unless you lie to him." Ben grinned faintly, and for the first time in weeks, Martha saw her boy smile. Something in that small exchange cracked the ice between them. She didn't lower the pistol, but she eased her finger off the trigger. Cole poured a bit of coffee into a tin cup and set it by the fire. The smell filled the tent like a memory of better days. Martha stared at the rising steam, her body aching with the temptation to just accept. He crouched near the fire but didn't look directly at her. "You got folks in town?" he asked. She shook her head. "Town's got no room for people like us." Cole nodded like he understood more than she meant to say. "Ain't much room for anyone with a conscience anymore." The rain began to ease, and with it the silence deepened. The fire burned steadier now, the tent warmer. The children had drifted off again, their tiny breaths rising and falling in unison. Martha sat opposite him, watching the way he fed the flames. His movements were deliberate, careful, the kind of care born not from habit but from respect. He didn't talk much, and that quiet was something she wasn't used to from men. Finally, she asked softly, "Why'd you stop here, Cole Maddox? Plenty of ridges between Redwater and Silver Bluff." He didn't answer right away. The fire popped, casting brief flashes of orange across his weathered face. "Guess I saw something familiar in that light of yours," he said finally. "Someone fighting to keep something alive." She didn't know what to make of that. Before she could ask more, a gust of wind pushed through the tent, snapping the flap open. Cole reached out to secure it, and for a moment their hands brushed. His skin was cold, but steady. the kind of steadiness that could carry someone else's fear without breaking. He met her gaze briefly, then looked away. "You shouldn't be out here," he said quietly. "This land don't forgive the weak, and it sure as hell don't forget the kind." Martha swallowed, unsure if it was warning or compassion. "We ain't weak," she said, her voice thin but certain. "No," he agreed softly. "You're not." He rose, brushing mud from his coat. Outside, the storm had softened to drizzle, the distant rumble of thunder rolling away across the plains. He untied his horse, then looked back toward her. "There's an old cabin by Dry Creek," he said. "Abandoned, but the roof still holds. It ain't far. Couple hours' ride. You and the young ones'll be safer there." Martha hesitated, torn between disbelief and longing. "Why would you help us?" Cole's eyes flickered with something she couldn't read. Guilt, maybe, or memory. "Because once," he said quietly, "someone helped me when I didn't deserve it." The wind stilled, and for a moment only the fire crackled between them. Martha looked toward her children, then at the man standing in the fading rain. Every instinct screamed to guard herself, but somewhere deep inside, a small, tired part of her whispered that maybe, just maybe, this was the mercy she'd been praying for. Cole extended a rough, calloused hand toward her and said in a voice as steady as the earth beneath them, "You'll be safe under a roof tonight." The cabin stood alone, half rotten, half hopeful, the kind of place where ghosts might sleep lighter than the living. And the wind sounded like it remembered every name that had ever passed through. By the time they reached Dry Creek, dawn had begun to gray the horizon. The rain had eased into a soft drizzle, turning the plains to mirror and mud. Martha rode behind Cole on his horse, her arms wrapped around the baby, while Ben and Lucy trudged alongside, their boots sinking with each step. The creek, narrow and stubborn, cut through the land like a vein that refused to dry. And beside it stood the cabin Cole had promised, leaning slightly to one side, roof patched with tin, windows gaping like tired eyes. Martha's first thought was that it looked ready to collapse. Her second was that it was still a roof. After weeks under canvas and stars, the sight of even half shelter pulled something loose in her chest. A fragile, aching kind of relief. Cole dismounted and tied his horse to the porch rail, testing the boards with his boot before gesturing to her. "Ain't pretty," he said, voice rough from the cold, "but it'll keep the wind off your bones." Martha climbed down carefully, her skirts heavy with rain. She adjusted the baby's blanket and stared up at the place, uncertain. "You been here before?" "Once," he said, stepping past her to push the door open. It creaked but didn't give way. "Belonged to a trapper who went east. Left most everything behind." Inside, the air smelled of dust and old wood smoke. The hearth was cold, cobwebs hung like lace from the rafters, and the single table bore the scars of knives and time. But there were 4 walls, a roof, and a stone chimney that still stood straight, and that was more than Martha had dared hope for in months. She looked around quietly, her fingers tracing the cracked edge of the window frame. "It'll do," she whispered. Cole nodded and went to work without waiting for thanks. He fetched logs from the porch, knelt by the hearth, and coaxed a fire to life. Sparks rose and danced, spreading warmth through the room in hesitant waves. The children gathered close, wide-eyed, their small faces lit by the first real glow of comfort they'd seen since the mines took their father. Lucy found a rusted tin cup on the shelf and began pretending to serve tea, her laughter soft but pure. Ben tested the sturdiness of an old chair, declaring it good enough. Even Eli, half asleep in Martha's arms, sighed as if the place itself was breathing warmth into his tiny body. Martha stood near the wall watching Cole. There was something different about him in daylight. Not just the weariness in his face, but the quiet purpose in his hands. He moved with precision, like every small act. Striking a match, sealing a gap, mending a board, carried meaning. She wondered what kind of man did this for strangers. "You don't owe us this," she said finally. Cole didn't look up. "Don't figure I do." "Then why?" she asked, her tone sharper than she meant it to be. He paused, pressing a log into place. Because someone once dragged me out of a storm when I wasn't worth saving. Figured I'd pay it forward before I run out of chances. The words hung heavy between them. Martha studied his profile, the set of his jaw, the lines that carved his face, the scar running along his cheek. There was a story there, one he wasn't ready to tell. When the fire caught properly, he stood and removed his hat, shaking out the rain. His hair was dark, streaked with gray at the temples, and his eyes, when they met hers, were as tired as they were kind. You rest, he said quietly. I'll see to the roof before the next rain hits. You've done enough. Not yet. He climbed the narrow ladder to the loft, the boards creaking beneath his boots. Martha tried to protest again, but his voice drifted down, steady and firm. A leaky roof don't wait for pride. She bit her tongue and sat near the hearth, pulling her children close. The firelight danced on their faces as they dozed one by one. For the first time in weeks, Martha didn't feel the bite of the wind through fabric. She listened instead to the sound of coal hammering above, rhythmic, determined, like the heartbeat of the place itself. Hours passed. The rain stopped completely, leaving behind the smell of wet earth and pine. Martha found herself humming an old tune her husband used to play on the porch before supper, the sound faint, almost forgotten. When Cole finally came down, he wiped his brow with the sleeve and crouched near the fire. His coat was gone, his shirt damp with sweat, and his hands streaked with sap and mud. He didn't say anything, just leaned back against the wall, breathing quietly. You fixed it? She asked. He nodded. Ain't perfect, but it won't drip over your heads anymore. Thank you, she said softly. He gave a small, almost embarrassed nod. You're welcome, ma'am. Something shifted in that moment. Not trust, not yet, but understanding. Two souls worn thin by loss, recognizing the same hollow ache in each other. Later, when the children stirred, Cole offered them a strip of dried venison from his pack. Lucy wrinkled her nose at first, but giggled when Cole pretended it was a treat fit for royalty. Ben asked if he could ride the horse come morning, and Cole promised to teach him if the weather held. The sound of their laughter, small, uncertain but real, filled the cabin like sunlight pushing through cracks in old wood. As the evening deepened, Martha noticed how still the world had become outside. No wind, no thunder, only the gentle murmur of the creek. She found herself glancing toward Cole again, curiosity tugging where suspicion had once lived. When the children finally slept, she asked quietly, You said someone saved you once. Was it long ago? Cole didn't answer at first. He stared into the fire, eyes distant. Feels like a lifetime. My wife and little girl were still alive then. The words dropped like stones into silence. Martha's heart clenched. She opened her mouth to speak, but he cut her off gently. Ranch caught fire one winter. I wasn't there. They didn't make it out. She drew a slow breath. The fire crackled, and for a moment neither of them moved. It was as though the ghosts of both their pasts had sat down beside them. I'm sorry, she whispered. He nodded once. So am I. The weight of shared grief settled softly between them, not as burden but recognition. Outside, the creek whispered, and the stars began to peek through torn clouds. Cole stirred the embers, then leaned his head against the wall, exhaustion overtaking him. Martha watched him in the half-light, her children's soft breathing mingling with the creak of settling wood. For the first time in months, she didn't feel utterly alone. She lay down near the fire, keeping the baby close. Sleep crept over her slowly, gently. But just as her eyes closed, she heard him shift in the dark, his voice breaking the silence in a low, haunted whisper. Sarah. Martha's eyes snapped open. The name rolled from his lips again, quiet, sorrowful, a wound reopened by dreams. She turned toward him, heart pounding, watching the man who had saved her children's lives speak to a ghost she did not know. Outside, the wind began to rise again, and as Martha lay awake in the dark, she couldn't help but wonder, who was Sarah? and what part of Cole's past was about to find them next. By dawn, Martha knew. Kindness that deep runs from something darker. Some men helped out of duty, others out of guilt. And when she heard Cole whisper that name in his sleep, she understood he carried the kind of sorrow that never really let a man rest. The sun bled slowly through the thin curtain of mist over Dry Creek, painting the cabin in muted gold. Martha hadn't slept a full hour. The fire had burned down to coals, and Cole lay on the other side of the room, his hat pulled low, his breathing even. Yet she couldn't shake the echo of that whispered name. Sarah. It clung to the air like smoke that refused to fade. She rose quietly, careful not to wake the children, and stepped outside. The air was cold and still, carrying the scent of wet pine. The storm had washed the land clean, but inside her chest the same unease stirred. Cole Maddox had brought them to safety, fixed their roof, and given her children laughter again. But behind his calm eyes she'd seen a flicker of something restless, something haunted. When she came back inside, Cole was already up, stoking the fire and brewing coffee in a dented tin pot. His movements were silent, practiced, as if the rhythm of routine kept his thoughts at bay. "Didn't mean to wake you," he said quietly when he noticed her. "I wasn't sleeping." She hesitated, watching him pour the dark liquid. "You talked in your sleep." He froze for a second, then handed her a cup without meeting her eyes. "I figured." Martha took the coffee, the heat biting her palms. "You said a name. Sarah." He looked up then, eyes sharp but not angry. More like a man bracing for a blow he knew he deserved. "Yeah," he said softly. "That was my little girl." The words hit her harder than she expected. She lowered her gaze. "She's gone?" He nodded once, slow. "Years back, my wife too. Ranch fire took 'em both." His voice didn't waver, but his hands betrayed him, fingers tightening around the tin cup. "Wasn't an accident. Outlaws torched the place after I wouldn't sell my land." Martha's breath caught. "The same kind of men that took my husband," she murmured half to herself. Cole glanced at her then, really looking at her for the first time since sunrise. "You lost him that way?" She nodded, eyes distant. "Mining accident, they said. But I heard tell someone cut corners, took the money for safety rails and pocketed it. Whole tunnel came down. My husband never stood a chance." Silence fell again, thick and heavy, broken only by the soft crackle of the fire. For a long time, neither spoke. They didn't have to. The air between them was filled with the quiet understanding of people who had buried love and learned to live on the edge of its absence. Cole finally stood and adjusted his coat. "Roof still needs more patchin', rain's comin' again by tonight." Martha followed him outside, the morning light spilling across the land. The cabin, for all its wear, looked less broken now. She watched him climb the ladder, hammer in hand, and start working on the upper shingles. He moved like a man who had done this 1,000 times, deliberate, patient, as though fixing the roof was easier than fixing what was broken inside him. Ben came running out, eager to help, handing nails and holding boards. The sight of her boy smiling again stirred something warm in Martha's chest. Cole laughed softly when the hammer slipped and Ben caught it midair. "You got quick hands, kid," he said. "You'd make a fine ranch hand one day." Ben's face lit up. "You got a ranch?" Cole hesitated, then nodded slowly. "Used to. Place called Red Hollow, nothing but ashes now." Lucy appeared at the doorway, clutching her doll, and Martha called out, "Breakfast's ready." They gathered inside again, steam rising from a pot of thin oatmeal. Cole joined them without a word, taking only a small portion. He bowed his head before eating, a quiet grace that surprised Martha. She watched him, realizing that his kind of strength wasn't loud or showy. It was the sort that bore pain quietly and still found room for decency. After breakfast, he checked his horse, mended the fence, and stacked extra firewood beside the porch. Martha noticed how the children followed him everywhere, drawn to the steadiness he carried. It unnerved her and comforted her all at once. When the afternoon shadows grew long, Martha found herself sitting by the creek staring at her reflection in the water. Cole joined her silently, crouching nearby. "You keep looking like that," he said lightly. "You'll scare the fish away." She managed a small smile. "Ain't fish I'm worrying about." He picked up a flat stone and skipped it across the water. "You don't trust me yet. I barely know you." "That's fair." He paused, then added, "But I meant what I said. I don't hurt people who don't deserve it." "And who decides who deserves it?" she asked, voice sharp. His eyes met hers, dark, steady, tired. "A man's past don't wash clean easy, Martha. I've done things I ain't proud of, but I sleep better when I help someone else stand back up. That's all I'm trying to do here." The truth in his tone disarmed her. There was no boasting, no excuses, just a weary honesty that stripped her anger bare. She turned her gaze back to the creek. "Maybe we're both just trying to stand again," she said softly. Cole nodded. Maybe so. For a long while they sat in silence, the sound of the water carrying the weight of words unspoken. When they finally rose to head back, the cabin looked almost like a home. Smoke curling from the chimney, laughter drifting faintly from the doorway. Inside, Lucy had arranged wildflowers in a chipped jar, and Ben was showing Eli how to stack sticks for the next fire. Martha's chest tightened at the sight. These small, ordinary things, they were what she'd fought for all this time. That night, as the fire crackled and the rain began tapping gently on the roof Cole had fixed, Martha found herself watching him again. He sat near the window, oil lamp flickering against his weathered face. He looked calmer now, almost peaceful. But every so often she caught his eyes drift to the flames, distant, haunted. "You ever think about leaving this place?" she asked softly. Cole smiled faintly. "I've been riding for years, and not once did I find a place that felt worth staying for." She looked down at her hands, then back at him. "And now?" He didn't answer right away. "Now I'm thinking maybe staying ain't such a bad thing if there's folks that need you." Martha didn't reply, but the warmth that rose in her chest said enough. For the first time since her husband's death, she felt the faint stir of something like safety. Fragile, cautious, but real. The night settled deeper. The rain outside grew steadier, and the world beyond the cabin walls felt miles away. The children slept soundly, their breathing a steady rhythm in the dark. Martha leaned back, eyes growing heavy. Then faintly through the downpour came the echo of hooves, distant but clear. Cole's head lifted immediately. He stood, every muscle tense, and stepped to the window. Out across the ridge, a faint flicker of lantern light moved through the rain. "What is it?" Martha whispered. He didn't answer. The rider paused at the edge of the clearing, silhouetted against the lightning for just a heartbeat, then turned his horse and rode hard toward Silver Bluff. Cole's expression darkened. "Trouble," he murmured. Martha's pulse quickened as Cole's eyes followed the vanishing rider. Whoever that man was, he'd seen the smoke from their chimney. And by dawn, someone powerful in Silver Bluff would know they were here. In town, a man in a tailored vest slammed his glass down so hard the whiskey jumped from it. "That land's mine. No squatter stays there." His voice cut through the din of the Silver Bluff saloon like a whip, sharp and final, and every man within earshot knew better than to question Silas Boone. Silver Bluff was a town born of dust and greed, a place where gold whispers turned into gunfire and men like Boone ruled with deeds inked in fraud and blood. His office sat above the saloon, walls lined with maps and ledgers that stretched across half the territory. Every house, every ranch, every scrap of land near the creek ran through his hands one way or another. He wasn't just the richest man in town. He was the law. He paced now, eyes narrowed beneath slicked hair and a cigar burning between his fingers. The sheriff stood nearby, hat in hand, watching the storm of Boone's temper unfold. "You telling me some drifters holed up in my cabin?" Boone barked. The sheriff hesitated. "Wasn't no drifter alone, Silas. Word is he's got a woman and 3 kids with him." Boone's lip curled. Then they can freeze somewhere else. That cabin sits on Boone land, and Boone land ain't charity. He turned toward the window, watching the rain roll down the glass. Who is he? Couldn't say for sure. Rider who saw him said the man had a scar on his cheek, rode a dark bay horse, kept to himself. Boone froze. His jaw clenched. Scar on his cheek, you said? The sheriff nodded uncertainly. Boone let out a bitter laugh, low and dangerous. Well, I'll be damned. Looks like the ghost finally crawled out of the ashes. He set his cigar in the tray, eyes glinting like cold steel. Cole Maddox, he muttered. Didn't think I'd ever hear that name again. The sheriff shifted nervously. That the same Maddox from the Red Hollow fire? Boone smiled thinly. The very one. Poor fool never did learn when to walk away. He poured himself another glass, his hand steady despite the venom in his voice. That land was his once, till I took it fair and square. Man sells his soul cheap when grief's got him by the throat. He downed the drink and set the glass aside. Send 6 of my boys, he ordered. Tell 'em to clear the place by sundown. I want that cabin empty before word spreads that Cole Maddox is still breathing. Yes, sir. Boone turned back toward the rain, his reflection shimmering faintly in the window. Cole should have stayed buried with his ghosts, he whispered. Because if he's back, it means he's come for what's mine. And I don't lose what's mine. Back at Dry Creek, the world felt softer that morning, unaware of the storm galloping its way from town. The cabin smelled of coffee and sawdust. Cole had spent the early hours mending fence posts and setting a snare line near the creek, while Martha tended to the garden plot she was trying to coax from the stubborn soil. Ben and Lucy chased each other across the yard, laughter echoing through the valley. For once, the place didn't sound like grief. It sounded like living. Martha looked up as Cole approached, his shirt rolled to the elbows, sawdust in his hair. You work like a man making up for lost time, she said with a faint smile. Maybe I am, he replied, wiping his hands on a rag. She studied him, noticing the lightness that had started to replace the haunted look he wore when they first met. You built this place once before, didn't you? His gaze drifted toward the tree line, where the old fence disappeared into the brush. Yeah, he said quietly. Every nail, every board. My wife planted lilacs by the window. Martha followed his eyes to a patch of wild green still struggling near the foundation. They're growing back. Cole's throat tightened. Guess some things don't die easy. He didn't tell her everything, not yet. That this land, this cabin, had once been his before Boone took it through forged papers and hired guns. That the fire that claimed his family had been Boone's doing, though he'd never proven it. But he felt it now, deep down. The pull of the past, rising again like smoke from old embers. By afternoon, the sun broke through the clouds, casting silver over the creek. Martha hung damp clothes near the porch, watching Cole repair a cracked water trough. There was a calm between them, quiet, companionable, fragile. She set a bowl of stew beside him. You'll wear yourself to the bone if you don't rest. Cole gave a tired grin. Rest don't come easy to men like me. You talk like you're twice your age, she teased. Maybe I am, he said softly. She looked at him, then really looked. The scars, the wear, the depth of sorrow behind his eyes, and realized that underneath the grit and shadow there was still decency. A rare kind that didn't need words to prove itself. Lucy came running from the creek, breathless and excited. Mama, Mr. Cole, there's a deer by the woods. Cole smiled faintly. Best not scare it, sweetheart, let it eat in peace. Martha's heart warmed at how natural his voice sounded with her children. Protective, gentle. For the first time, she allowed herself to imagine what life might be like if peace could last. But peace never stayed long in Wyoming. Miles away, Boone's men saddled their horses outside the Silver Bluff stables. 6 of them, rough men with hollow eyes and quick hands, rode under Boone's orders with rifles and rope. The leader, a wiry man named Pike, spat in the dust and said, Boss says no one left standing when we're done. They rode hard, cutting across the ridges toward Dry Creek. Evening fell golden across the valley when Cole noticed it. A glint on the horizon. He squinted into the distance, the last rays of sunlight catching something metallic. He wiped his hands and stepped to the edge of the porch. "What is it?" Martha asked, sensing the change in his face. "Riders," he said flatly. She froze, her hands tightening around the baby she carried. "How many?" "5. No, 6. His jaw hardened. "Coming fast." Ben ran to the doorway, eyes wide. "You know 'em?" Cole didn't answer right away. His eyes narrowed, scanning the line of riders cresting the ridge. Their silhouettes moved in a formation he knew too well. Professional. Precise like wolves trained to kill. "Get the kids inside," he said quietly. "Now." Martha obeyed without question, ushering the children into the cabin and closing the shutters. Cole reached for the rifle leaning near the door, old but well kept. The weight of it in his hands felt too familiar, too easy. As he loaded a shell, a grim calm settled over him. Boone had found them. Of course he had. He glanced back through the open door where Martha stood pale and still in the firelight, the baby clutched close to her chest. "What do they want?" she whispered. Cole met her eyes, voice low and sure. "They want the land." Outside, thunder rumbled again. Not from the sky this time, but from hooves pounding the earth as the riders drew near, dust and fury rising behind them. Cole stepped off the porch, rifle in hand, his silhouette dark against the fading light. "They want the land," he repeated, his voice a steady growl. "But they'll have to ride through me first." Dust rose like smoke, the kind that follows men who mean to do harm. It came rolling down the ridge like the breath of the devil himself. And when Martha stepped out onto the porch, clutching her shawl, she saw them. 6 riders slicing through the light, rifles glinting in the dying sun. Cole stood at the edge of the porch, his hand already on the rifle's worn stock. The air had shifted, gone heavy and sharp, the way it does before a storm breaks. The children huddled inside, peering through the cracks of the shutters, their faces pale with confusion and fear. Martha could hear her heart pounding louder than the hooves. The riders fanned out as they reached the yard. Their leader, a thin man with a scar that pulled one corner of his mouth into a permanent sneer, reined in his horse. "You Maddox?" he called. His voice was raw, as if sandpapered by whiskey and smoke. Cole didn't move. "Who's asking?" "Name's Pike. We ride for Silas Boone." He spat in the dirt, smirking. "You're trespassing on his land. He says to clear out by sundown or we'll clear you out ourselves." Cole's jaw tightened. Boone's got a short memory. This land was mine long before he bought his first lie. Pike chuckled darkly. "Ain't what the papers say." He shifted in the saddle, hand brushing the butt of his revolver. "We ain't here to argue, friend. Pack your things, take your squaw and your brats, and be gone before we count to 10. Martha flinched at the word, anger surging hotter than fear. Cole took one step forward, voice low but cold as iron. "You're gonna ride back to town and tell Boone I said he can choke on his own greed." The men laughed, the sound coarse and cruel. Pike spat again, shaking his head. "Guess that's your answer." It happened fast, faster than breath. Pike's hand went to his revolver, but Cole was quicker. The crack of his rifle shattered the silence, the sound echoing across the valley like thunder. Pike's hat flew from his head as the bullet grazed his temple, and chaos erupted. Gunfire tore through the quiet evening. Horses reared, bullets thudded into the porch posts, splinters flying like hail. Martha screamed for the children to stay down. Cole moved with deadly precision, reloading as he ducked behind a rain barrel, his rifle barking again and again. 2 riders fell hard into the dirt, one crying out, clutching his side. The acrid scent of gunpowder filled the air. Martha dragged a trembling Lucy beneath the table inside the cabin while Ben clung to the baby. Her breath came ragged, but her mind sharpened. The kind of sharpness that only comes when a mother realizes death has found her doorstep. Outside, Cole's shoulder jerked back as a bullet tore through his coat. He stumbled, biting back a groan, blood seeping through the fabric. Martha saw him stagger, and before she could stop herself, she ran to the door. "Cole!" she cried. He turned sharply. "Stay inside!" But she didn't listen. Something fierce rose up in her, something buried beneath months of fear and hunger. She grabbed the old pistol from the mantel, the one Thomas had left behind, and stepped onto the porch. Her hands trembled, but her eyes didn't waver. One of Boone's men saw her and laughed, thinking her no threat. He turned his gun toward the cabin, and that's when Martha fired. The shot cracked the air, and the man fell from his saddle, shock frozen on his face. The others hesitated, just long enough for Cole to strike again. Another shot, another man down. The rest began to pull back, realizing this wasn't the frightened widow and broken drifter they'd expected to find. "Go on!" Pike shouted, clutching his bleeding arm. "Fall back! We'll bring Boone himself next time!" They turned their horses, galloping toward the ridge, dust kicking high into the darkening sky. Cole stood breathing hard, rifle still raised, eyes scanning until the last rider disappeared. Only then did he lower it, his body swaying. Blood ran down his sleeves, staining the porch boards beneath his boots. Martha dropped the pistol and rushed to him. "You're hit," she said, her voice trembling. "It's not deep," he lied, but the way his knees buckled told her otherwise. She half carried, half dragged him inside, calling for Ben to fetch water. Lucy tore strips from an old sheet, her small hands shaking as she pressed them to the wound. Cole winced but said nothing, teeth gritted, sweat beading on his forehead. "Don't you dare bleed out on me now," Martha muttered, tying the cloth tighter. Cole managed a weak smile. "You're a stubborn woman." "Lucky for you," she shot back, but her voice cracked at the edges. Outside, the last light of sunset bled across the land, painting everything in a copper glow. The smell of gunpowder still hung in the air. Inside, the cabin was silent except for the crackle of the fire and Cole's labored breathing. When his color began to return, Martha sat back, exhaustion washing over her. For a long moment, neither spoke. The children huddled near the hearth, too stunned to move. Finally, Cole broke the silence. "You saved my life." Martha looked at him, tears welling despite herself. "You saved ours first." A faint smile tugged at his lips. "Didn't figure you for a fighter." She met his gaze, steady. "You'd be surprised what a mother can do when her children are in the crossfire." He laughed softly, then winced from the pain. "Remind me not to argue with you." For a while they just sat there, two people who'd both fought their ghosts and somehow survived another night. Martha tended the fire while Cole drifted in and out of restless sleep, the wound bound and clean. The world outside had gone quiet again, eerily so, the kind of silence that doesn't mean peace, only pause. Martha stepped onto the porch once more, staring out toward the dark horizon. The land looked still, but she could feel it. Trouble wasn't done with them yet. Behind her, Cole stirred, his voice hoarse. "They'll be back." "I know," she said. "But next time we'll be ready." He nodded, eyes half closed. "Boone won't send just his dogs. Again?" Martha frowned. "What do you mean?" Before he could answer, a sound cut through the night, a low, pained groan from outside. She spun toward it, pistol in hand, and saw one of the fallen riders crawling through the dirt near the fence, blood trailing behind him. Cole pushed himself upright, but she got there first, kneeling beside the man. His face was pale, eyes wild with fear and pain. She pressed the gun barrel to his chest. "Why'd Boone send you?" she demanded. The man coughed, choking on his own breath. You don't get it," he rasped. "Boone's coming himself." Her stomach turned cold. "When?" The man shuddered, eyes rolling back. "Soon," he gasped, and then went still. Martha rose slowly, her pulse hammering in her ears. She turned toward the cabin where Cole stood in the doorway, pale and silent, the firelight flickering behind him. "Boone's coming," she whispered, the words trembling in the night air. Cole's expression darkened, his voice low and grim. "Then we'd better start digging in. because next time the devil rides with him. The law in Silver Bluff wore a fancy hat and answered to Silas Boone. Justice in that town didn't come from the courthouse. It came from the barrel of a gun and the handshake of a rich man who owned half the valley and the souls in it. By morning, word of the shootout at Dry Creek had swept through Silver Bluff like wildfire. Men whispered about it over whiskey glasses. Women gossiped behind laundry lines, and every tongue in town repeated the same name with quiet dread. Cole Maddox. Inside Boone's office, the air was thick with cigar smoke and arrogance. The sheriff stood stiff-backed by the door, hat clutched in nervous hands, while Boone leaned over his desk, reading a telegram through a haze of smoke. "So he's still breathing," Boone muttered. "Killed 3 of my men, did he?" The sheriff cleared his throat. "4, sir. The woman shot 1 herself." Boone's eyes narrowed, his jaw tightening. "A woman and a crippled drifter. And my boys let that happen." He slammed the paper down, voice rising. "I pay for loyalty, not incompetence." The sheriff swallowed hard. "They said he's holed up at the old cabin. Word is he's got a family with him." Boone gave a dry chuckle, low and mean. "Family. Cole Maddox playing house again. Guess the fool didn't learn last time what happens to people who stand too close to him." He turned to the window, the town stretching out below like a toy built for his amusement. "Tell your deputies to stay put. Law's got no business up there. This one's mine." "Yes, sir." Boone watched the sheriff leave, then let his mask slip. The smile vanished, replaced by a look that could freeze blood. He opened a drawer and pulled out a small, worn locket. Inside, the faded picture of a woman and child stared back at him. Boone's expression softened for the briefest moment, then hardened again. He snapped it shut. "You should have stayed buried, Maddox," he murmured. "You took what was mine once. I'll finish what I started." Out at Dry Creek, the world had gone still again. The bodies from the night before were buried at the edge of the clearing, shallow graves marked only by stones. The earth was dark and wet where blood had soaked through it. Cole stood over the graves, hat in hand, his shoulder bound tight beneath his shirt. He looked worn, not just from pain but from memory. Martha came up beside him, her face pale but set. "You shouldn't be on your feet," she said. He shook his head. "Ain't got time to rest. Boone knows where we are now." Her eyes narrowed. "Then what do we do?" He didn't answer at first. He just stared out toward the ridge, the place where Boone's men had come from. "I used to ride for that man," he said finally. Martha blinked. "You what?" Cole's voice was low, rough with guilt. "Years back, when I came home from the war, Boone was building his empire. Said he needed good hands, men who'd do what was asked and not ask why. I didn't know the kind of man he was then. Thought I was helping build something honest." He took a breath, his hands tightening on the brim of his hat. "He had me collect debts for him. Ride out to farms, ranches, tell folks to pay what they owed or lose everything. Most did, some didn't, one didn't. And Boone burned their land to the ground." Martha stared, her stomach turning cold. "The red hollow fire?" Cole nodded, eyes dark. "That was my place, my wife and little girl. I was supposed to be home that night, but Boone sent me to the other side of the county on purpose. Said he had business that couldn't wait. When I came back, all I found was ash." Silence stretched between them, heavy and terrible. The sound of the creek was the only thing breaking it. Martha's voice trembled when she finally spoke. "He used you." "He ruined me," Cole said, barely above a whisper. "Took the land, forged the papers, and turned my grief into his excuse to finish what he started. I've been riding ever since, trying to outrun a ghost I can't bury." She stepped closer, her tone fierce but steady. "Then stop running. You said this was your land, then take it back." Cole looked at her, surprised. "You don't understand, Martha. Boone's got half the county in his pocket. Lawmen, ranchers, hell, even the preacher bows when he walks by. Then we find the ones who don't," she said, her chin lifting. "You think you're the only one he's hurt?" There's others out there, folks who lost everything same as you. Maybe they're scared, maybe they're tired. But if someone stands up first, they'll follow. He wanted to argue, to tell her she didn't know what Boone was capable of. But when he looked at her, at the fire in her eyes, the stubborn resolve that refused to break, he saw something stronger than fear. He saw belief. "All right," he said finally. "We'll ride to town, quiet-like. I know a few men who used to work for me. Men Boone shorted on pay when he took over. Maybe they'll listen." Martha nodded. "And I'll speak to the preacher's wife. She lost her brother to Boone's men last winter. If anyone'll help, she will." So they saddled the horse at first light. Cole rode slow, the bandage under his shirt damp with blood, but his spirit steadier than it had been in years. Martha rode behind, wrapped in her shawl, eyes scanning the horizon. When they reached the edge of Silver Bluff, the streets were already alive with talk. Whispers of Boone's temper, of the gunfight, of ghosts that refused to stay buried. Cole slipped into the back of the blacksmith shop where an old friend, Henry Tillman, worked. "Cole Maddox," Henry muttered when he saw him. "I thought Boone had you hung years ago." "Nearly did," Cole said. "Need your help, Henry? He's coming for me again. And this time, he's bringing hell with him." Henry looked toward the street, jaw tightening. "Boone's got his claws deep in this town, but maybe it's time someone cut him loose." By sundown, they had a handful of allies. Not an army, but enough to matter. Henry the blacksmith, Widow Calhoun, who'd lost her land to Boone's taxes, a ranch hand named Ezra, who'd buried his brother because of Boone's temper. Folks who had reasons to stand up if someone gave them the courage to try. When Cole and Martha rode back to Dry Creek, there was a spark between them. Not of romance, not yet, but of shared purpose. Something stronger than survival. Justice. They reached the cabin just as the sun was dipping behind the hills. Cole dismounted, scanning the ridge, uneasy. The air felt wrong. Too still. He could smell it before he heard it. Smoke. He climbed the porch steps and froze, staring into the distance. Along the far ridge, dust clouds rose like a promise of death. Martha followed his gaze. "More riders?" Cole's face hardened. Not just riders. Through the haze, he could see the sun glint off gun barrels. 6 men, their silhouettes familiar. And at their center, a figure in a black coat riding high and proud. Silas Boone himself. Cole's grip tightened on the rifle as the first echo of hooves reached the valley. "He's not sending his dogs this time," Cole said, voice grim. "The wolf's coming down from his den." The night burned with torchlight. 6 riders encircling a mother's fragile hope. Fire licked the edges of the dark as the men of Silas Boone rode down from the ridge like wolves scenting blood, their torches flickering through the rain-soaked air. The soft peace that had settled over Dry Creek was gone, replaced by the metallic scent of fear. Cole had seen war before, in the fields of Tennessee and the ashes of Red Hollow, but never had it felt this personal. The cabin behind him was more than a shelter now. It was a promise he'd made to Martha and her children, one he'd die before breaking. He could feel Martha's presence behind the shutters, hear the creak of the floorboards as she moved to shield her children from the glow outside. The riders halted at the edge of the clearing. Silas Boone sat at their center, mounted on a pale stallion, the firelight painting his face in cruel gold. His vest gleamed, polished boots untouched by mud, his arrogance thick enough to choke on. "Cole Maddox," he shouted, voice rolling like thunder. "You got something that belongs to me." Cole stepped into the open, rifle at his side. "You mean the land you stole? Or the soul you tried to burn out of me?" Boone smiled, cold and thin. "Still talk too much. I could have let you live quiet, but no. You had to go play hero." He nodded to his men. "Take it down. Burn it if you have to." Martha, watching from the window, clutched the baby tight. Ben and Lucy crouched near the hearth, trembling but silent. She whispered to them, her voice low but fierce. "You stay down. You don't move till I say." The first shot cracked through the night. A rider fired toward the cabin, the bullet splintering wood inches from Martha's head. She ducked instinctively, then looked toward Cole outside, framed by the orange flicker of torches. He moved with the calm of a man who'd already decided what he was willing to give. Cole fired back, dropping one of Boone's men clean out of the saddle. The shot echoed across the valley, thunder chasing it. The other riders scattered, circling wide. Gunfire erupted, lighting the night with flashes of flame. The cabin shook as bullets punched through the walls. Martha shoved the children toward the far corner, her own pistol clutched tight in her trembling hand. "Cole!" she called out, voice breaking. "I'm here!" he shouted back, ducking behind the porch post. He fired again, reloaded, then fired once more. The rifle kicked hard, the sound deafening. He counted each shot. He had 8 rounds left, 8 lives to spare before the darkness claimed them all. Inside, the smoke began to build from the torches thrown onto the roof. The dry thatch caught fast, flames crawling upward like snakes. Martha grabbed a bucket, shouting for Ben. Together they threw water onto the ceiling, the hiss of steam filling the room. Lucy sobbed quietly, holding the baby close. "Don't cry, sweetheart," Martha whispered, her eyes wet but burning. "We're not running anymore, not tonight." Outside, Cole's shoulder slammed into the post as another bullet grazed his arm. He hissed in pain, pressing a hand against the wound. The world tilted for a second, but then he saw Boone watching him from the shadows, smiling that devil's smile. "You could have been rich, Maddox," Boone called out. "You had a future under me." Cole gritted his teeth, raising his rifle. "I had a family. You burned it." He fired, the shot slicing past Boone's head, close enough to send his hat spinning. The land baron's smile vanished, replaced by rage. "Kill him!" he bellowed. The men advanced, firing into the dark. Cole ducked behind the porch, wood splintering around him. His rifle jammed. He swore under his breath, reaching for the revolver at his hip. 6 shots. He fired 3, each one deliberate, measured. 2 riders fell. 1 horse screamed and bolted. The clearing turned to chaos, torches scattering, mud kicking up under hooves. Then he heard it. A cry from inside, Martha's voice, desperate. "Cole! The back wall's giving!" He spun, sprinting to the door. Inside, smoke billowed, thick and choking. The roof had caught again, the flames spreading faster than they could fight them. Martha stood in the haze, face streaked with soot, children pressed behind her. "We can't stay here," she coughed. "They'll burn us out." Cole grabbed a wet blanket from the floor and threw it over the flames near the rafters. "We hold," he said, voice hoarse but steady. "We hold till they run dry." "Run dry?" she asked. "Of what?" "Of courage," he said, loading his last 2 bullets. She looked at him then, really looked. The blood on his sleeve, the soot in his hair, the sheer resolve carved into his face. And something inside her steadied. "Then I'll hold with you." He nodded once, wordless. They fought side by side, the cabin shaking under the onslaught. Martha fired through the window, her shots clumsy but fierce. Cole moved with lethal precision, picking targets, buying seconds. Minutes stretched like hours. Then came silence, sudden and heavy. The gunfire stopped. The riders pulled back, their shadows retreating into the trees. Smoke drifted through the clearing, mixing with the mist off the creek. Cole's heart pounded. It couldn't be over. Not yet. He stepped out onto the porch, gun raised, scanning the dark. "Boone!" he shouted. "You done hiding behind hired guns?" A voice answered, smooth, cold, close. "Not hiding, Maddox. Just waiting." Before Cole could turn, something struck the back of his head, hard. The world went white, then black. He hit the ground, vision swimming, gun slipping from his grasp. Through the blur, he saw Martha's face at the door, her scream swallowed by the night as Boone's men swarmed from the trees. 2 grabbed her, forcing her back inside, while another kicked Cole's rifle away. He tried to rise, but a boot pressed into his chest. Boone leaned down, torchlight painting his face in fire. "Should have stayed gone, old friend." Cole spat blood, glaring up. "You ain't got friends, Boone, just graves." Boone's expression darkened. "That can be arranged." He turned to his men. Take him alive. He gets his punishment proper. In front of the town he's shamed. Cole thrashed, landing a blow to one man's jaw, but another slammed the butt of a rifle into his ribs. Pain exploded through him. Martha fought, clawing at the man who held her, screaming his name. Cole! He managed one last look toward her, eyes locking with hers across the fire-lit chaos. Keep the kids safe, he rasped before another strike sent him to darkness. By dawn, the fire had burned low. The cabin still stood, scarred but not destroyed. Martha crouched beside her children, trembling as she watched the dust trail vanish down the road toward Silver Bluff, the riders hauling Cole behind them, bound and bloodied. Lucy clung to her mother's sleeve. Mama, where are they taking him? Martha stared at the horizon, jaw set, eyes burning with something new. Fury. To hang him, she whispered, in front of everyone. She rose slowly, wiping the soot from her hands, her voice steady now. But they don't know me yet. Martha turned toward the smoldering ruins of the cabin, her silhouette framed by the dawn. They think they've ended this, she said under her breath, eyes on the road to Silver Bluff. But I'm going to that town, and I'm bringing the fight with me. Martha had buried one husband. She wouldn't bury another man who'd saved her children. The memory of the mine that stole Thomas Hale flashed before her eyes as she watched the dust trail vanish into the distance. Cole's limp body tied to Boone's horse. That sight seared itself into her soul like iron in flame. This time she swore the man she cared for would not die while she stayed behind. The morning after the siege was heavy and gray. Smoke still drifted from the cabin ruins, curling into a sky that looked too calm for what had happened. Martha stood there for a long while, the smell of ash and gunpowder clinging to her hair. Her hands were raw, her heart numb, but her mind was sharp, clearer than it had been in years. She had faced storms, hunger, loss, but never purpose like this. She turned toward her children. Ben stood beside her, jaw clenched, trying to hide his trembling. Lucy's eyes were red from crying, and baby Eli slept in her arms, unaware of how close death had come. Martha crouched and took Ben's shoulders in her hands. You're the man of the family now, she said softly. You take care of your sister and the baby till I get back. Ben shook his head, fear breaking through the brave mask. You can't go alone, Ma. He's got men everywhere. Martha brushed his hair from his face. I won't be alone for long, she whispered. There are still good folks in Silver Bluff. They just forgot they were brave. I aim to remind them. She packed quickly. Thomas's revolver, the last loaf of bread, Cole's small hunting knife. Then she saddled Cole's horse, the same dark bay that had carried her from despair to safety once before. She kissed each of her children's foreheads, her tears falling into their hair, and turned to leave. But first she needed to know they were safe. Just over the ridge, about an hour's ride from the cabin, stood a small farmhouse belonging to widow Agnes Corby, a quiet woman who'd lost her own sons to Boone's mine years ago. Martha had met her once at the town market back when she still had a few coins to trade. Agnes had a soft voice and a hard spine, the kind that bent for no man. When Martha rode up, Agnes was on her porch with a shotgun in her lap, watching the horizon. She lowered it slightly when she saw who approached. You look like the storm just chewed you up and spit you out, she said. Not far from the truth, Martha answered, dismounting. I need your help. Agnes listened as Martha explained everything. The fight, Boone's men, Cole's capture. When she finished, the widow's face hardened with understanding. Leave the young ones here, she said simply. I'll keep 'em fed and quiet. You do what you have to do. Martha clasped the woman's hands, gratitude and fear warring in her chest. I'll come back for them, I swear it. You'd better, Agnes replied. And when you face Boone, don't look down. Men like him feed on fear. Martha nodded. With one last glance at her children through the window, Lucy humming to the baby, Ben helping set a pot on the stove, she turned her horse towards Silver Bluff. The town rose from the dust like a scar on the land, loud, greedy, alive with men who looked away from everything that wasn't theirs to own. As she rode down Main Street, eyes followed her from every doorway. Whispers started immediately. "Ain't that the tent woman? Heard she shacked up with Maddox." "She's trouble." Martha kept her chin high. She had no time for shame. The wooden planks creaked under her boots as she dismounted outside the saloon. Boone's banners hung from the balcony above, his initials branded into everything from the hitching posts to the barrels stacked by the wall. The man truly believed he owned the earth beneath his boots. Inside, the saloon was crowded with miners and ranch hands nursing their evening drinks. The piano went silent when she stepped through the door. A dozen pairs of eyes turned to her, some curious, most cold. Behind the counter, the bartender raised an eyebrow. "We don't get ladies in here unless they're pouring whiskey," he muttered. "I'm not here for whiskey," Martha said. "I'm looking for Cole Maddox." A ripple went through the room. Men shifting, whispering. Finally, a voice spoke from the corner. "You won't find him here. He's sitting in Boone's barn cell behind the courthouse, waiting for sunrise." Martha turned toward the speaker. A young woman in a scarlet dress, her face painted but her eyes sharp. She leaned against the post, cigarette glowing faintly in her hand. "They're hanging him at first light," the woman said. "Boone's making a show of it. Wants everyone to see what happens when you cross him." Martha's throat tightened. "Then I need to see him before that." The saloon girl studied her for a long moment. "Name's Clara Doone," she said. "Boone thinks he owns me same as this place. But I've been waiting for a reason to see him fall." She stubbed out the cigarette. "You might just be that reason." Before Martha could thank her, another figure emerged from the back. An old man with a miner's stoop, his beard grayed and his clothes dust-caked. "Heard Boone's name," he said. "He took my claim 20 years ago. Left me to rot in them tunnels. If you're planning to do something, ma'am, I'll stand with you." Martha nodded, feeling her courage grow with each word. "We'll need more than two." Clara smiled faintly. "Then you'll want to see the preacher." The church stood on the far edge of town, candles flickering through the windows like trembling stars. The preacher, Reverend Samuels, was sweeping the front steps when Martha approached. He looked weary but kind, his eyes carrying the kind of faith that survived disappointment. "Reverend," she said, her voice shaking, "Boone's going to kill a man who doesn't deserve it. Cole Maddox, you know his name?" Samuel stopped, leaning on his broom. "I know it," he said slowly. "He built this town with his own hands once, before Boone turned it to sin. Then help me stop him." The preacher's gaze hardened. "You can't stop Boone with prayers alone, Mrs. Hale." "Then help me find men who'll stand," she said. "Just long enough to make him answer for what he's done." He hesitated, then nodded. "There are still good hearts here. You find them and I'll call them to the square at dawn." By the time Martha returned to the saloon, Clara had gathered three more: a stable hand, a drunk rancher, and the old miner. It wasn't much, but it was a start. "Boone's got the sheriff in his pocket," Clara said. "He'll have guards posted all around the square." "Then we'll use that," Martha replied. "If Boone wants the whole town to see him hang an innocent man, then he's gonna have to look those people in the eye when the truth comes out." As she spoke, the church bell tolled in the distance, one long, low note that rolled through the streets like a warning. A hush fell across the town. From the courthouse steps, a deputy shouted into the gathering dusk, reading from a paper. "By order of Silas Boone, the outlaw Cole Maddox is to be hanged at sunrise for crimes against Silver Bluff." The sound carried down every street, every alley, reaching Martha where she stood beneath the saloon's eaves. She closed her eyes, the words hammering through her chest. She opened them again, fire blazing behind the tears. "Then sunrise," she whispered, tightening her grip on Cole's revolver, "is when Silver Bluff finally sees what justice really looks like." The rope swung in the morning wind, creaking like an old voice whispering last prayers. Beneath it stood Cole Maddox, his hands bound, eyes closed, not in fear but in quiet acceptance. He had met death before in war and in fire, but this time it came dressed in daylight, with half the town watching and a man named Silas Boone smiling like a preacher at a funeral. Silver Bluff had never seen a spectacle like it. Boone made sure of that. He wanted the whole town to witness his power, to see what happened when anyone dared to stand against him. The gallows had been built in the center of the square overnight, rough beams still smelling of sap. Boone's men lined the edges of the crowd, rifles gleaming, hats low. Mothers clutched their children. Miners stood silent, faces hard, shame burning in their eyes. Boone sat high on a horse near the front, his black coat trimmed with silver, the picture of authority and sin. He raised his hand, silencing the murmurs. "Citizens of Silver Bluff," he called, voice booming over the square. "Justice rides today. This man, Cole Maddox, is guilty of murder, trespass, and rebellion. He took lives that weren't his to take, land that wasn't his to keep, and dared to challenge the law of this town." His words rolled like thunder. Behind him the sheriff stood stiffly, hat in hand, looking anywhere but at Cole. Boone gestured toward the platform. "The law will be upheld. The land will be cleansed, and Silver Bluff will remember who keeps it safe." Cole's head lifted slowly. His voice was hoarse but steady. "You call this justice, Boone? You stole land from widows, starved miners, and burned families alive." Boone sneered. "You burned yourself, Maddox. I just held the match." The crowd gasped, but Boone didn't care. He turned to the hangman. "Do it." The noose swung closer, the coarse fibers brushing Cole's neck. The sky above was pale blue, almost too beautiful for what was about to happen. Cole's thoughts drifted, not to Boone, not even to death, but to Martha. Her voice, her strength, the way she had looked at him the night before the siege, as if he still had something worth saving. Then, just as the hangman reached for the lever, a shout cut through the air. "Stop!" Every head turned. Through the crowd rode a woman on a black horse, her shawl flying like a banner, eyes blazing with fire and fury. It was Martha Hale, mud on her boots, pistol at her hip, and something clutched in her hand. A stack of yellowed papers tied with twine. Boone's smile faltered. "You've got nerve, woman," he said, "and step aside before you join him." But Martha didn't stop. She rode right into the square, the horse's hooves scattering dust across Boone's polished boots. She dismounted and faced him, her voice cutting through the hush. "You call this man a thief," she said, holding up the papers. "But it's you who's been stealing for years. These deeds, found in your old cabin at Dry Creek, have your name forged over Cole Maddox's. Proof that you took what wasn't yours and buried the truth under lies." The crowd stirred. Murmurs spread like fire through dry grass. The sheriff stepped forward, eyes narrowing. "Is that true, Boone?" Boone laughed, but it sounded brittle. "Those are fakes, lies from a desperate woman." "Then why's your signature twice on one page?" Martha shot back. "And the notary's name, dead 3 years before the date written?" She held the pages high for all to see. "You forged every inch of your empire. You burned his ranch to cover it up." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Boone's face darkened, rage replacing arrogance. "Enough!" he snapped. He turned to his men. "Take her down!" But it was too late. The first gunshot cracked through the square, not from Boone's men, but from the blacksmith, Henry Tillman, standing by the well, his rifle smoked. "You'll touch that woman over my dead body," he growled. Another shot rang out, then another. The square exploded into chaos. Miners drew revolvers from their belts, townsfolk ducked for cover. Martha dove behind a wagon as bullets splintered wood around her. Cole, still bound, twisted violently against the ropes, shouting, "Martha, get back!" Boone's horse reared, and he fought to stay in the saddle, barking orders. "Kill them all! End this now!" The preacher's voice rose from the steps of the church, shouting, "No more blood, Silas. This town's done bending its knees to you." Smoke filled the air. The sheriff fired a warning shot, but was struck down by one of Boone's men before he could act again. The gallows beam splintered as a stray bullet struck it, sending the rope swinging wildly. Martha crawled through the dirt toward the platform, her fingers bleeding, the papers still clenched in her hand. "Hold on, Cole," she screamed. One of Boone's guards turned his rifle on her, but she fired first. The man crumpled, smoke rising from the barrel of her pistol. She reached Cole just as another bullet whistled past, grazing her shoulder. Her hands shook as she worked at the knots binding his wrists. Cole tore free and snatched the fallen guard's revolver. He fired instinctively, dropping a gunman behind Boone's horse. "You shouldn't have come," he rasped. "You'd have done the same," she shot back. Boone, seeing his men falter, yanked his reins and turned toward the alley. "I built this town," he shouted, voice cracking. "It dies with me." Cole fired, grazing Boone's coat, but missed as the land baron spurred his horse hard toward the bridge. Martha raised her pistol, but the last shot clicked empty. Boone twisted in the saddle, firing back wildly, and the bullet shattered a window just behind her. Then came the sound that froze her heart. Lucy's scream. Martha spun, eyes wide. On the far edge of the square, she saw her daughter, Lucy, clutched in Boone's grip. The little girl must have slipped from the widow's care in her panic, following her mother into town. Boone hauled her up onto the horse in front of him, pressing the barrel of his pistol to her head. "Put down your guns," he roared, "or the girl dies." Cole's blood ran cold. "Boone, don't you touch her," he said, voice like thunder. Boone sneered. "You want your happy ending, Maddox? Come and take it." The horse bolted, hooves hammering the street as Boone rode hard for the canyon road. Martha screamed Lucy's name, running after them, but Cole caught her arm. "I'll bring her back," he said, eyes burning with resolve. Martha shook her head, tears streaking through the grime. "Not without me." Cole hesitated, then nodded once. "Then saddle up fast, he's got a head start." Behind them, Silver Bluff lay in chaos. Gun smoke, shouting, the noose still swinging in the wind. The truth about Boone's crimes was out, but the cost had just risen higher than either could bear. As they mounted up and thundered out of town, dust swirling behind them, Martha's voice broke through the pounding hooves. "He took my daughter, Cole," she cried. "And I swear on every grave he's made, I'll take her back or die trying." A mother's cry and a cowboy's vengeance rode side by side into the storm. The clouds over the Wyoming plains churned like a living thing, dark, violent, and hungry, as two riders tore across the land, driven by fury and fear that no man or heaven could slow. The wind screamed through the canyon pass, carrying dust and thunder with it. Cole Maddox leaned low over his saddle, his wounded shoulder burning with every jolt. But he didn't dare slow. Martha rode beside him, her face streaked with dirt and tears, her hair whipping wild behind her. The storm was rolling in fast, but Boone's trail was fresher still. Hoofprints cutting deep into the wet soil, leading west toward the Badlands. "He's heading for Red Hollow," Cole shouted over the wind. Martha's voice cracked with desperation. "Then we cut him off before the canyon narrows." Cole's jaw clenched. "That road's suicide in this weather." She shot him a look that could have stopped the thunder itself. "Then let's die getting her back." He didn't argue. They pushed harder, the horses panting, mud flying in sheets. Lightning tore the sky wide open, turning the plains white for a breath, and in that flash they saw him, Silas Boone, riding hard, a small figure clutched in front of him on the saddle. Lucy. Martha's heart twisted. Her daughter's small form jolted with each stride, her tiny hands clutching at Boone's coat. Martha's scream was lost to the thunder, but Boone must have heard it, because he looked back, his eyes catching the light like those of a cornered wolf. He spurred his horse faster, veering off the trail into the rocky maze of dry canyon. Cole swore under his breath. "He's taken the ridge path. It's narrow, unstable." "Then that's where we finish it," Martha said through gritted teeth. They followed, the storm closing around them like a shroud. Rain came in sheets now, drumming the earth, turning the canyon floor into a river of red mud. The sound of hooves echoed off the stone walls, a thunder of pursuit and defiance. Martha's voice trembled as she rode. If he hurts her. He won't, Cole said, his voice low and certain. Not while I'm breathing. She looked at him, seeing the grim resolve in his face, the man who'd lost one family to Boone's greed and wasn't about to lose another. But beneath that determination, she saw guilt too. Heavy, raw, the kind that carves itself into bone. You blame yourself for this, she said. Cole didn't answer. You think if you'd killed Boone when you had the chance, none of this would have happened. His jaw tightened. He took everything from me once. I thought sparing him made me better than him. He paused, voice breaking. Now I see it just made him bolder. Martha's grip on the reins tightened. Then don't make the same mistake twice. They crested a ridge, and there he was. Boone's horse slipping in the mud as he fought to keep balance on the narrow ledge. The wind howled through the canyon, carrying Lucy's terrified cries. Mama! Lucy! Martha's voice cut through the storm like a blade. Boone yanked the reins, pressing the gun to the child's side. You take one more step and she falls, he shouted. Cole reined in his horse, mud splattering up his boots. Let her go, Boone. This ends with you, not her. Boone's laughter was half-crazed, carried by the wind. You think you can take back what's mine, Maddox? I built this land with my hands, and you both live on the scraps I left behind. You built it on blood, Martha spat. My husband's, his wife's, everyone you ever cheated. Boone's grin widened. And I'll die richer than the both of you combined. Lightning split the sky again, a blinding flash revealing everything. The slick rock, the narrow ledge, Boone's trembling horse, and the sheer drop beneath them into a raging river below. Cole dismounted slowly, boots sinking into the mud. You want me, Boone? I'm right here. But you let that girl go first. Boone cocked the hammer back on his pistol. Step closer and she dies. Cole's voice softened, low and steady. You think killing her's gonna fix what you broke? You can't stop what's coming, Boone. Your name's already poison in that town. Folks know what you did. Boone's eyes flickered. Lies. I got your deeds, Cole said. Martha showed the town, the preacher, the sheriff. They saw the proof. You're finished, Silas. Every man you ever bought is turning against you right now. For the first time, Boone hesitated. Doubt flickered across his face. His hand shook slightly, just enough. Cole saw his opening. He stepped forward, mud sliding beneath his boot. Let her go, Silas. Don't do this. But Boone's pride burned hotter than his fear. If I can't own this land, he hissed, no one will. He jerked Lucy toward the cliff's edge. Martha screamed, charging forward, heedless of the danger. Cole lunged too, the three of them colliding in the rain. Boone's gun went off, a deafening crack that echoed through the canyon like judgment. Lucy tumbled backward, her small body rolling toward the edge. Martha dove after her, grabbing her arm just in time. The girl screamed, dangling over the drop as Martha strained to pull her up, boots sliding in the mud. Hold on, baby, Mama's got you. Cole tackled Boone to the ground, the gun skittering across the rock. The two men rolled, mud and blood mixing as they fought in the rain. Boone's fists were wild, driven by rage. Cole's were precise, fueled by everything he'd lost. He landed a blow to Boone's jaw, another to his ribs. But Boone was relentless, slamming Cole's wounded shoulder into the stone. You can't kill me, Boone roared. You owe me your life. Cole gritted his teeth, grabbing Boone by the collar. You're right, he growled. I do. He threw him hard against the ledge. Boone stumbled, his foot slipping. Cole's revolver lay a few feet away, half buried in the mud between them. Both men lunged for it. Martha, gasping, finally dragged Lucy to safety. She turned and saw the two men struggling, the revolver sliding closer to the edge. Cole, she shouted. Boone's hand clamped over the gun first. He twisted, pressing it toward Cole's chest. This time, Maddox, he snarled, you die first. Cole's eyes met Martha's for a split second, a silent goodbye or a promise. Then his hand shot up, grabbing Boone's wrist. They fought for the barrel, muscles straining, the storm roaring louder than their screams. Lucy clung to her mother's skirt, crying, "Mama, stop them!" Martha's eyes darted, and she saw another revolver half buried near the rocks, dropped from Boone's belt. She snatched it up, her fingers slick with rain. "Cole, duck!" she cried. Time slowed. Cole twisted just as the gun went off, the flash lighting the canyon like fire. The sound rolled through the storm, echoing off the cliffs. For a moment all was still. Boone staggered back, his eyes wide, a dark bloom spreading across his chest. The revolver slipped from his grip, falling into the rushing water below. Cole stared, breath ragged, unsure who had pulled the trigger, him or her. Boone swayed, his voice barely time, thanking Martha for breaking the chains that held his town. By the time they reached the cabin, the sun was high and the wind carried the smell of wild sage. The fire-blackened timbers still stood strong, scarred but not broken, like the people who'd once called it home. Martha climbed the porch steps, hand resting on the splintered rail. "She's still standing," she said softly. Cole dismounted, wincing as his wound pulled. "Told you," he said with a faint grin. "Goodwood don't give up easy." For the next few weeks they worked side by side, rebuilding what had been lost. The children fetched water from the creek, their laughter echoing through the valley. Cole hammered new shingles onto the roof with one good arm, while Ben held the ladder steady, proud to be helping the man who'd saved his family. Lucy gathered flowers and tucked them into jars on the windowsill. The cabin began to change, not just rebuilt, but reborn. At night they sat around the fire, the air warm with the smell of pine smoke and bread. Martha would hum soft lullabies as the flames flickered, and Cole would sit by the door, carving small wooden figures for the children. Sometimes, when the night grew quiet, their eyes would meet across the glow of the fire, not with words, but with understanding. Both had lost everything once. Now they'd found something neither had dared to believe in again. One evening, as the sun bled into the horizon, Cole stood on the porch watching the wind ripple through the tall grass. Martha joined him, baby Eli sleeping against her shoulder. The air was cool, gentle, peaceful. "You know," he said after a long silence, "I used to think a man like me wasn't meant to stop riding. Thought peace was something other folks found." Martha smiled faintly. "Maybe you were just riding in the wrong direction." He looked at her then, his eyes soft, voice low. "You reckon this could be home?" She glanced toward the cabin where Ben and Lucy played under the eaves, their laughter carrying across the field. "It already is." Cole's throat tightened. For the first time in years, the ache in his chest wasn't from loss. It was from the weight of something good, something whole. By the start of summer, the roof was mended, the fence rebuilt, and the garden blooming with wildflowers. Silver Bluff had changed too. Boone's name was whispered now, not spoken loud. His ledger books, discovered in his office, told the truth of his crimes, every theft, every bribe, every murder he'd paid for. The townsfolk, once afraid, had begun to rebuild under Reverend Samuel's guidance. The blacksmith, Henry Tillman, visited Dry Creek often, helping Cole with the forge. Clara Doone, the saloon girl, sent gifts for the children. Ribbons, sweets, and once a silver cross, she said, belonged to someone who needed it more. The past still lingered, but it no longer ruled them. One quiet afternoon, Martha sat by the window, rocking baby Eli in her arms. The room smelled of bread cooling on the hearth and the faint perfume of lilacs from the garden. Lucy and Ben played outside, their laughter mingling with the hum of bees. Cole's footsteps creaked softly across the floor behind her. "Roof's fixed for good," he said. "Even put in new boards above the loft." She smiled without looking up. "Then maybe tonight, for once, I won't have to wake up to raindrops on my face." Cole chuckled. "Can't promise it won't rain again, but this time we'll be dry." He stood for a moment watching her, the way the sunlight caught the strands of her hair, the calm that had finally settled over her features. He'd seen her at her lowest, fierce and unbroken even when the world tried to crush her. Now seeing her at peace felt like witnessing a miracle. He cleared his throat softly. "There's something else," he said. Martha looked up, curious. Cole held up his old revolver, the same gun that had saved their lives more than once. Its barrel was worn, the grip smooth from years of use. He turned it over in his hand, then hung it carefully on a nail above the mantel. "What's that for?" she asked. He smiled faintly. "A reminder," he said, "that a man's got to know when to lay down his fight." Martha studied him for a long moment. "You really mean to stop?" "I mean to live," he said simply. "And I reckon that's harder sometimes." She rose from her chair, stepping closer until they stood side by side. For a long moment they just listened, to the wind, to the creek, to the soft, steady sound of life continuing. Outside, Lucy's laughter echoed through the fields. Ben's voice followed, calling for supper. Martha leaned her head against Cole's shoulder, whispering more to herself than to him. "We made it." He looked down at her, his hand finding hers, rough palm closing around gentle fingers. "Yeah," he said quietly. "We did." The fire crackled, the baby stirred, and the light through the window fell across the revolver on the wall. A symbol not of violence, but of peace finally earned. As the night settled soft over Dry Creek, the wind carried a single whisper through the valley, a promise of tomorrow. And in the small cabin under a real roof, the family that had once been broken slept soundly, their ghosts at last at rest. If this story of courage and redemption touched your heart, don't ride off just yet. Hit that like button if you felt Martha's fight was worth every scar, and tell us in the comments, what would you have done if you were in her place under that storm? And if you believe the West still has stories worth telling, then subscribe and stay in the saddle. More tales of grit, love, and justice are coming down the trail soon, because out here every heart's got a frontier.